Imagine losing the one thing you love most in the world. Now imagine, 3 years later, walking down the streets of an ordinary city and suddenly seeing that face, the same eyes, the same smile, the same birthmark. Impossible, right? But what if it wasn't? What if God had prepared something so incomprehensible, so far beyond human logic that it would make you question everything you believe about destiny, loss, and redemption? This is the true story of Richard Coleman, a Boston magnate who had it all, until the day he lost the only thing that truly mattered. What happened afterward defied every law of probability and reason. Stay until the end, because the truth behind this identical child will leave you speechless. Boston, Massachusetts, October 2019. Richard Coleman was 52 years old and had an empire valued at $420 million. His company, Coleman & Associates, had dominated the East Coast real estate market for almost 2 decades. He owned 3 mansions, one in Beacon Hill, another in Martha's Vineyard, and the third in Miami. His name appeared regularly in Forbes, and investors from all over the world fought for meetings with him. But none of that mattered anymore. For 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, Richard counted every one, he had lived with the memory of burying his only son. Benjamin Coleman was only 9 years old when cancer took his life, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The diagnosis came like a lightning bolt from a clear sky. And in just 16 months, despite the best doctors money could buy, despite experimental treatments in clinics in Switzerland and Germany, Benjamin was gone. Richard remembered every detail of that last day. The hospital room at Mass General, the cold morning light filtering through the window, Benjamin's small hand in his so fragile it felt like it might break, and those green eyes, so much like his own, looking up one final time before closing forever. "Daddy, don't cry," Benjamin had whispered. "We'll see each other again. I promise." Those were the last words Richard ever heard from his son. His wife, Catherine, couldn't bear the pain. Their marriage, already fragile, completely collapsed. 6 months after the funeral, she asked for a divorce and moved to California. Richard didn't fight it. In fact, he barely reacted. He was emotionally dead, running on autopilot, burying himself in work just to avoid feeling anything at all. He sold properties, closed million-dollar deals, attended charity galas. But inside, he was hollow, completely hollow. The mansion in Beacon Hill, once filled with life and the laughter of a child, had become a silent mausoleum. Richard kept Benjamin's room exactly as it had been. The toys, the Harry Potter books on the shelf, the baseball uniform hanging on the door. Sometimes, late at night, he would go in and just sit on the floor, hugging his son's favorite teddy bear, letting the tears fall. No one saw that. To the world, Richard Coleman was the ruthless businessman, cold, calculated. But alone, he was nothing more than a shattered father. It was on a gray Tuesday in October that everything changed. Richard was in Dorchester, a neighborhood he normally avoided. His company was considering a revitalization project in the area, and he needed to see the properties in person. His driver, James, guided the S-Class Mercedes through the narrow streets, past old houses, corner shops, and ordinary people living ordinary lives. Richard stared out the window without really seeing anything. His mind, as always, was far away, lost in memories of Benjamin. He was about to tell James to head back to the office when something made him freeze. A boy. On the sidewalk in front of a rundown convenience store stood a boy. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Too skinny, wearing worn-out clothes and torn sneakers. But that wasn't what made Richard forget how to breathe. It was the face. The face was identical to Benjamin's. Not similar. Not resembling, identical. "Stop the car," Richard heard his own voice say, hoarse and distant. "Sir?" James looked at him in the rearview mirror, confused. "I said stop the car," Richard shouted, something he almost never did. The car screeched to a halt. Richard was already pulling the door open before they had even fully stopped, stepping out into the street, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. The boy was slinging a torn plastic bag over his shoulder, getting ready to leave. Richard crossed the street almost running, not caring about traffic, horns blaring around him. "Wait," he shouted. The boy turned. And Richard Coleman, the ruthless millionaire who had stared down the toughest Wall Street investors without flinching, felt his legs give way. The eyes, emerald green, the exact same shade. The shape of the face, the slightly upturned nose, the tiny birthmark above the left eyebrow. Even the way his brown hair fell across his forehead was the same. It was Benjamin. It was his son back from the dead, standing there on the dirty sidewalk in Dorchester. But it wasn't Benjamin. It couldn't be. "Sir?" the boy said, taking a step back, clearly frightened by the man in the Italian suit staring at him like he had seen a ghost. Richard couldn't speak. His throat closed up. Tears began to sting his eyes. What's your name?" he finally managed to murmur. The boy glanced around nervously, as if looking for an escape route. "Ethan," he said softly. "Ethan Brooks. Ethan, but not Benjamin." Of course it wasn't Benjamin. But dear God, the resemblance was impossible. Supernatural, terrifying. "How old are you?" Richard asked, trying to steady his trembling voice. 12, Ethan answered, still watching him warily. "Look, sir, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just—" No, Richard cut in quickly, raising his hands. "You're not in trouble. I'm sorry. You remind me of someone. The word felt so inadequate to describe the overwhelming, absolute, impossible resemblance between this street kid and his dead son. Ethan Brooks watched the strange man in the expensive suit with a mix of confusion and fear. He had learned early on not to trust adults, especially rich ones. Nothing good ever came from them. Usually, they only wanted something, or worse, had intentions that made his stomach turn. But there was something different about this man. Something in his eyes. It wasn't a threat. It was pain. Deep pain, the kind Ethan recognized because he carried his own. "Do you live around here?" Richard asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice still trembled. Ethan hesitated. Every instinct in him screamed not to answer, to walk away, not to get involved. But something held him there. Maybe it was the way the man looked at him, as if he were seeing both a miracle and a tragedy at the same time. "Sort of," Ethan replied vaguely. "Look, sir, I need to go." "Wait," Richard said quickly, slipping a hand into his pocket. Ethan tensed, ready to bolt. But the man only pulled out his wallet and held out a $100 bill. "Please, let me buy you lunch or dinner. Whatever you need." Ethan stared at the money. $100. He and his mom lived on less than 50 a week. 100 meant real food. It meant maybe catching up on the overdue rent. It meant surviving a little longer. But there had to be a catch. There was always a catch. "Why?" Ethan asked defiantly. "What do you want?" Richard blinked, as if the question had snapped him out of a trance. What did he want? He wasn't even sure. All he knew was he couldn't let this boy walk away, not yet. Not when every fiber of his being screamed that something impossible, something divine, was happening right in front of him. "I don't want anything," Richard said truthfully. "Just to talk. 5 minutes. Then you can go. No strings attached." Ethan studied the man's face. There was sincerity there. And desperation. He knew desperation when he saw it. 5 minutes, Ethan agreed, snatching the $100 bill and shoving it quickly into the pocket of his ripped jeans. "But out here, where people can see." Richard nodded, respecting the boy's caution. They walked over to a bench near a bus stop. Richard's driver, James Dees, watched from the car, clearly baffled by his boss's behavior. Sitting on the worn-out bench, Richard didn't know where to begin. He looked at Ethan's profile and felt his chest tighten again. The resemblance was overwhelming. Every angle, every detail. "Tell me about yourself," Richard said gently. "Your family. Your life." Ethan shrugged, the defensive gesture of someone who had learned not to reveal too much. "Not much to tell. I live with my mom in a tiny apartment on Columbus Avenue. She works cleaning 3 different places, but it's never enough. My dad, I don't know who he is. Never met him." Richard absorbed every word. "Do you go to school?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "When I can. But usually I have to work. Odd jobs, carrying groceries and stuff like that. Helps pay the bills." 12 years old, Richard thought, with a stab of pain. 12 and already carrying the weight of the world. Benjamin had never worried about anything beyond homework and which game to play after school. 2 boys, so physically alike, but living in completely different worlds. "Your mother?" Richard asked carefully. "What's her name?" Lisa Brooks." Ethan shot him a wary look. "Why are you asking all this?" Richard took a deep breath. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you say that this boy was the perfect image of the son you lost? I had a son, Richard said quietly. He died 3 years ago. Leukemia. He was 9. Ethan was silent for a moment, processing. I'm sorry, he said finally, and his voice carried genuine empathy. Ethan knew about loss. Maybe not the same way, but he knew pain. You look just like him, Richard continued, his voice breaking. Not just similar, identical. The eyes, the face, even the birthmark above the eyebrow. It's impossible, but here you are, right in front of me. Ethan's hand instinctively went up to the birthmark. A small dark spot his mother always said meant he was special. It's just coincidence, sir, he said, though his voice wavered. Coincidence, Richard repeated, almost laughing, though it came out humorless. Do you know the odds of me being on this exact street at this exact moment and seeing you? Out of all of Boston, out of all the days. I never come to Dorchester, never. But today something brought me here. And there you were. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine. He didn't believe much in God or destiny. Life had been too hard for that. But he had to admit, there was something strange about this meeting. What was his name? Ethan asked. Your son? Benjamin, Richard said. And just speaking the name aloud made his eyes fill with tears again. Benjamin Richard Coleman. They sat in silence for a moment. Two strangers bound by an impossible resemblance and a shared pain, each in their own way. Richard looked at the boy beside him, too skinny, wearing old clothes, hands rough from work no child his age should know. And in that moment, he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Ethan, he said, turning to meet those impossible green eyes, what if I could help? You and your mom. A better job for her, proper schooling for you. I'm not asking for anything in return. I need to do this. I need to help. Ethan stared at him, suspicious but also desperately hopeful. Why? Because I look like your dead kid. The bluntness of the words cut Richard like a knife. But they were true. Yes, he admitted, but also because you deserve it. Because no 12-year-old should have to work to help pay rent. Because maybe Benjamin led me to you. Maybe this is the purpose. Ethan wanted to believe it. How he wanted to. But life had taught him that good things didn't happen to kids like him. I need to talk to my mom first, he said finally. Of course, Richard agreed immediately, pulling a business card from his pocket. Here's my number. My cell's written on the back by hand. Call me anytime, day or night. Ethan took the card, staring at the name embossed in gold letters. Richard Coleman, CEO, Coleman and Associates. His eyes widened. You're that Richard Coleman, the real estate tycoon. Richard gave a faint, sad smile. Yes, and all that money, all that success. It meant nothing when I needed it most. It couldn't save my son, but maybe it can make a difference now for you, for your mom. Ethan tucked the card carefully into his pocket, alongside the $100 bill. Part of him felt like he was dreaming. Part of him expected to wake up on the thin mattress in the freezing apartment and find none of this had happened. I'll call, Ethan promised, standing up. Thanks for the money, and I'm sorry about Benjamin, really. Richard rose as well, aching to hug the boy but knowing it wasn't appropriate. Thank you for giving me 5 minutes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ethan started to walk away, then paused and looked back. Mr. Coleman, that thing you said about Benjamin sending you to me. My mom always says when impossible things happen, it's because God is pulling the strings. Maybe she's right. And with that, Ethan Brooks disappeared into the crowd of Dorchester, leaving Richard Coleman standing on the sidewalk, tears streaming down his face, feeling, for the first time in 3 years, that maybe, just maybe, there was still a purpose for his life. Ethan ran the 6 blocks back to the apartment he shared with his mother, clutching the $100 bill tightly in his pocket as if it might vanish. His heart pounded, not just from the sprint day, but from the storm of emotions Richard Coleman had stirred inside him. The building they lived in was a crumbling 1960s structure on Columbus Avenue, with water stains on the walls and staircases that groaned dangerously with each step. Ethan climbed the 4 flights up to apartment 4C, where the door had 3 locks because the neighborhood was far from safe. Mom, he called as he walked in. Lisa Brooks was in the tiny kitchen, preparing what looked like yet another meal of instant noodles. She was 32 but looked older. Years of scrubbing houses and offices had left their mark. Stooped shoulders, rough hands, tired eyes that rarely lit up anymore. But when she saw her son, her face brightened just a little. "Ethan, thank God, I was worried. Where have you been?" "Mom, you're not going to believe what happened," Ethan blurted, pulling the $100 bill from his pocket. "Look at this." Lisa dropped the spoon she was holding, her eyes widening. "Ethan Michael Brooks, Turdy, where did you get that money?" Her voice carried that mother's edge, half fear, half fury. "Did you steal it? Did you get mixed up with—" "No! Ethan cut her off. "A man gave it to me. He just wanted to talk." Fear sharpened in Lisa's eyes. She grabbed her son by the shoulders, scanning him head to toe. "What man? Did he hurt you? Did he touch you?" "Ethan, tell me the truth right now." "Mom, stop. It wasn't like that," Ethan said, understanding her panic. "He's legit. Look." Ethan pulled the business card from his pocket and handed it to her. Lisa took it with trembling hands, reading the embossed name. "Richard Coleman," she whispered. Then her eyes widened even more. "The Richard Coleman. The real estate billionaire?" "That's him," Ethan confirmed. "The story's insane. He said I'm identical to his son who died. Like, identical. He even cried when he saw me." Lisa sank into one of the worn kitchen chairs, still clutching the card. Her face had gone pale. "Identical? What do you mean identical?" "He showed me a picture on his phone," Ethan explained, sitting beside her. "Of his son, Benjamin. Mom, it was freaky. It was like looking in a mirror. Same eyes, same face, even the same birthmark." Lisa was silent for a long moment, staring at the card in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was oddly controlled. "And what does he want?" "He wants to help us," Ethan said eagerly. "He said he could get you a better job. Put me in a real school. No strings attached." "Mom, this could be our chance to—" "No." The word was so sharp, so firm, that Ethan froze mid-sentence. Why?" he asked, confused. Lisa stood and walked to the small window that overlooked the filthy alley behind the building. She crossed her arms on her whole body tense, like a wire stretched too tight. "You don't understand how people like that work, Ethan," she said, her voice low but heavy with something Ethan had never heard from her before. Not just fear, but something deeper, bitterness, old anger. "What people?" "Rich people," Ethan asked. "Mom, I know life's been hard, but this is different. He lost his son. He's grieving. I saw it in his eyes. This isn't about money or power. It's about pain." "It's always about power," Lisa snapped, spinning to face him. Tears shimmered in her eyes, always. "People like Richard Coleman. They take what they want. They see something they desire and they take it. And people like us, we lose." Ethan was stunned by the intensity of her reaction. "What are you talking about? What happened to you?" Lisa ran her hands over her face and trying to steady herself. She walked back to the table and sank into a chair, as if her legs couldn't hold her anymore. "You know I grew up in the foster system," she began, her voice trembling. "What you don't know is that when I was 15, a wealthy family adopted me. The Harringtons. They lived in Newton, had a massive mansion, fancy cars. I thought my life had finally changed. I thought I finally had a real family." Ethan sat down beside her, holding her hand. She had never told him this part of her story before. "For 2 years, it was perfect," Lisa went on, tears now streaming freely. "They gave me everything. Nice clothes, private school, my own room. I loved them. I really did. But then," she stopped, swallowing hard. "Then their biological daughter, Caroline, she was studying in Europe, came home pregnant. Suddenly, they needed to focus on her, on the baby, on their real family. And me? I was just a charity project that had run its course." "Mom," Ethan whispered, horrified. "They sent me back 3 weeks after Caroline returned," Lisa said, her voice breaking. 17 years old. "They just dumped me back into the system like I was a dog that didn't work out. They said it wasn't a good fit, that I didn't fit their plans anymore." "I didn't know," Ethan said, squeezing her hand. "I never told you because I was ashamed," Lisa admitted. "Ashamed that I believed they actually wanted me, that I let myself love people who saw me as disposable." She looked at Ethan with fierce, haunted eyes. "And now this man shows up, this billionaire who lost his son, and suddenly you appear looking exactly like that son. Don't you see? You're a convenient replacement. A band-aid for his grief? That's not it, Ethan protested. You weren't there. You didn't see him. It doesn't matter what he looked like, Lisa said firmly. What matters is that people like him take what they want, when they want. And when they're done, they throw it away. And I will not let you go through what I went through. I won't let you get attached to someone who can discard you when the novelty wears off. So we just stay like this? Ethan asked, frustration rising in his voice. Poor, barely scraping by, you working yourself to death. Because of what some family did to you when you were a teenager. Because of protection, Lisa shot back. I'm protecting you. Or you're punishing me for other people's mistakes, Ethan said, and immediately regretted it when he saw the pain flash across his mother's face. Lisa fell silent, tears sliding down her cheeks. Finally, she whispered, What if he tries to take you from me? Rich people have lawyers, Ethan, they have power. If he decides he wants to adopt you, that he can give you a better life than I can, the law might side with him. I could lose you, and there it was. The real fear, it wasn't about pride or old wounds. It was the raw terror of a mother afraid of losing her child. Mom, that's not going to happen, Ethan said, hugging her tightly. No one is going to take me from you, never. You can't promise that, Lisa sobbed against his shoulder. You're all I have. If I lose you. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the cramped kitchen, while the noodles grew cold on the stove and the $100 bill sat forgotten on the table. But in Ethan's mind, a battle was forming. He loved his mother more than anything, but he had also seen something in Richard Coleman's eyes. It wasn't threat or manipulation. It was connection. It was shared pain. It was something that felt bigger than both of them. And the impossible resemblance to Benjamin. It couldn't just be coincidence, could it? Something greater was at play. Ethan felt it deep in his core. And no matter how much fear his mother carried, he knew he had to find out what it was. The question was, how could he do it without destroying the only person who had ever truly been there for him? The next 3 days were silent torture in apartment 4C. Lisa barely spoke to Ethan, burying herself in double shifts at work as if she could outrun the conversation they both knew they needed to have. Ethan had hidden Richard Coleman's business card under his mattress, staring at it every night before falling asleep, the phone numbers on it pulsing with unspoken possibilities. On Thursday night, everything changed. Lisa came home at 11, exhausted as always, and found a thick envelope slipped under the door. No return address, just their apartment number written by hand in elegant script. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside were $5,000 in cash and a letter. Dear Lisa Brooks, it began. Written on expensive letterhead in a strong, deliberate hand. I know we haven't met, and I understand if my gesture feels intrusive. I don't intend to frighten you or your son. But ever since I met Ethan on Tuesday, I haven't been able to stop thinking about him. His resemblance to my late son Benjamin is so profound it takes my breath away. I know it must sound insane to you, but to me, it felt as if God himself placed a sign in front of me. A sign that there is still purpose, still hope, still a reason to go on. I am not asking for anything. I don't want to replace you. I don't want to take Ethan from you. As a father who lost a child, I could never do that to another parent. Never. But I am asking for a chance. A chance to help. A chance to get to know this extraordinary boy who reminded me that my heart is still capable of feeling something beyond pain. The money in this envelope comes with no conditions. It's yours no matter what you decide. Use it to pay bills, buy food, whatever you need. And if you ever wish to talk, my number is below. Respectfully, Richard Coleman. Lisa read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling harder with each pass. Tears blurred the expensive paper. She looked at the cash spread across the table, more money than she made in 3 brutal months of work. Mom? She turned. Ethan stood in the bedroom doorway, woken by the noise. He saw the money. He saw the letter. He saw the look on his mother's face. He came here, Lisa whispered, her voice a mix of panic and something else, perhaps reluctant awe. He found out where we live. Ethan grabbed the letter, reading it quickly. When he finished, he looked at his mother with pleading eyes. Mom, he's not trying to buy us. He's trying to help. There's a difference, is there? Lisa challenged. though her voice lacked the conviction it had before. "How do you know?" "How can you be sure?" "Because I saw him, Mom," Ethan said, sitting beside her. "I saw a broken man. A man who lost everything that mattered. And somehow, for some insane reason, he found me. You're the one who always said God has a plan. What if this is it?" Lisa closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of losing you. Afraid of believing that good things can happen to people like us." "Then let me be afraid with you," Ethan said, taking her hand. "But let's try, please. We don't have to decide everything right now. Just, let's meet him, see if it's real." Lisa looked at her son. Her brave, strong boy who had grown up far too quickly because life gave him no choice. He deserved more. So much more. "All right," she whispered at last. "All right. We'll meet him." The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at a quiet cafe in South End, neutral ground far from both Beacon Hill and Dorchester. Richard arrived 15 minutes early, nerves buzzing through him like a teenager on a first date. When Lisa and Ethan walked in, Richard stood so quickly he nearly toppled his chair. Seeing Ethan again was like a punch to the gut. The resemblance to Benjamin was still impossibly exact. "Mr. Coleman," Lisa said formally, extending her hand. She wore her best clothes, a simple blouse and clean jeans, but Richard could see the tension in every line of her body. "Please call me Richard," he said, shaking her hand gently. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me this chance." They sat, a heavy silence filling the space at first. Richard had ordered coffee and pastries, but no one touched them. "About the money," Lisa began. "It's yours," Richard interrupted softly. "No conditions. No expectations. I had to do something." Lisa studied him for a long moment. He looked different from what she had imagined. More vulnerable. Less threatening. There was deep pain in his eyes, the kind she recognized because she had carried her own for so long. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why us? Why my son?" Richard drew in a shaky breath. "Because when I look at Ethan, I see Benjamin, and I know how that sounds. I know you probably think I'm some desperate man trying to replace what I lost. But it's more than that." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When Benjamin died, I died with him. I stopped feeling, stopped living. I was just existing, going through the motions, waiting for the day the pain would finally go away. But it didn't. It never did." Tears filled his eyes, and then I saw Ethan on that sidewalk. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt something. It wasn't like replacing Benjamin. Nothing could ever do that. But it was like Benjamin was telling me there's still love in the world. Still purpose. Still reasons to keep going. Ethan listened intently, his own eyes wet. "I don't want to take Ethan from you," Richard went on, looking straight at Lisa. "I don't want to replace you. You're his mother. That doesn't change. But I would like to be part of his life. If you'll let me, as a mentor, maybe, or a family friend, or just someone who cares." Lisa felt the walls she had built around herself start to crack. There was something genuine about this man. Something broken. Something honest. "You need to understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Ethan is all I have, everything. If you come into our lives and then change your mind, if this turns out to be just a phase of grief, then you send me away," Richard said instantly. "You hold all the control, all the power. I have no rights here. I know that. You set the terms, the pace, everything." Ethan looked between his mother and Richard, realizing something extraordinary was happening. Two wounded adults, both so afraid, both fighting to protect what they loved, finding middle ground. "I want this, Mom," Ethan said softly. "I want to know him better. I want to understand why we look so alike. I want someone else in my life who cares." Lisa looked at her son, then at Richard, then back at her son again, and she made the scariest decision of her life. "All right," she said, but slowly, with clear boundaries. "And the first time I feel like you're trying to pull him away from me, I'll leave," Richard promised. No arguments. No lawyers. No drama. They spent the next 2 hours talking. Richard told stories about Benjamin, his terrible jokes, his love of baseball, how he read Harry Potter 8 times. Lisa spoke about raising Ethan on her own, the struggles, the fears, the flashes of joy in spite of it all. And Ethan? Ethan just listened, watching two impossible worlds begin to connect. As they were leaving, Richard hesitated. May I hug you, Ethan? Just once. Ethan looked at his mother, who gave a reluctant nod. The hug lasted only 3 seconds, but it was enough for Richard to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. As he drove back to Beacon Hill, he didn't notice the dark car that followed them from the cafe. He didn't see the camera snapping photos through tinted glass. He had no idea someone was documenting his every move, someone with far too much to lose if the truth about Ethan Brooks ever came to light. 2 weeks after that first meeting at the cafe, something extraordinary was happening. Richard had become a steady yet respectful presence in Ethan and Lisa's lives. He paid 3 months' rent in advance, making it possible for Lisa to drop one of her jobs. He enrolled Ethan in a private school in Back Bay, covering the uniform, supplies, and even a new laptop. But more important than the money were the moments. Richard took Ethan to Red Sox games at Fenway Park, where Benjamin had loved to sit. Dinners at restaurants where he taught Ethan about business and about life. Long conversations about dreams, fears, and what it means to lose someone you love. Lisa watched cautiously, still afraid but beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was real. That good people still existed in the world. It was a Tuesday night when everything fell apart. Richard was in his home office at the Beacon Hill mansion, reviewing contracts when his cell phone rang. The name on the screen made his blood run cold. Catherine. His ex-wife hadn't called in over a year. Since the divorce, they'd hardly exchanged texts, and always through lawyers. Catherine? He answered, confused. You have some nerve, her voice thundered through the phone. You have the nerve to do this. Do what? What are you talking about? Don't lie to me, Catherine shouted, and Richard could hear she was crying. I know about the boy. I know what you're doing. Richard's stomach dropped. How did you? Who told you? Does it matter? Catherine snapped, her voice swinging between rage and pain. Did you find a replacement, Richard? Found a little doll who looks like our dead son so you can play happy family. It's not like that, Richard said, trying to stay calm as panic rose. Catherine, listen, I saw the photos. She cut in. At Fenway Park, in the North End, at the mall. You with that. That boy who looks like Benjamin. His smile, his eyes. I saw it all, Richard. All of it. Richard dropped heavily into his chair, head spinning. Someone had followed them. Taken pictures. Sent them to Catherine. But who and why? Catherine, please, let me explain, he begged. It's complicated, but it's not what you think. Then explain. She screamed. Explain how you can replace our son. How you can pick up some random kid off the street and pretend he's Benjamin. I'm not pretending anything. Richard shot back, his own voice rising. And I'm not replacing Benjamin. No one could. But when I saw Ethan, when I looked at him. Ethan, Catherine repeated, and the way she said the name was poison. You even know his name. How long, Richard? How long have you known this boy? A few weeks, Richard admitted. But Catherine, if you could just meet him, if you could see. I don't want to see, she said, her voice breaking now. I don't want to watch you play dad to another child while our son is in the ground. The words cut Richard like knives. That isn't fair, he whispered. I grieved just as much as you. I still do. Every day I wake up and remember Benjamin is gone. Every day the pain is there. But Ethan gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Hope, Catherine laughed bitterly. You call that hope? I call it delusion. And I call it dangerous. Dangerous? Richard frowned. What are you talking about? There was a heavy pause on the other end. When Catherine spoke again, her voice was cool, calculated. Have you asked yourself why this boy looks so much like Benjamin? Doesn't that strike you as suspicious? Weird genetics happen, Richard said, though uncertainty edged his voice. People who aren't related can nothing, Catherine snapped. Richard, I spent the last 48 hours digging. I hired a private investigator. You know what he found? Richard couldn't breathe. What? The boy's mother, Lisa Brooks, grew up in the foster system. No known family. The boy's father, never identified. She refuses to talk about him. No paternity record, no name on the birth certificate, nothing. And, Richard asked, though a terrible feeling was coiling in his gut, And I think you need to do a DNA test, Catherine said, her voice trembling now. Because if this boy looks that much like Benjamin, if the resemblance is that impossible, that perfect Richard, have you considered he might actually be related to us? The world stopped. What are you saying? Richard murmured. I'm saying your brother was a drunken womanizer before he died, Catherine said cruelly. I'm saying David spent years living recklessly with anyone, without caring about consequences. I'm saying maybe, just maybe, he left more behind than debt when he crashed that car. Richard felt as if he'd been punched. David, his younger brother, dead 13 years now in a car accident. David, who had battled alcoholism and self-destructive behavior. David Gayak, who had the same Coleman green eyes, the same DNA. No, Richard said, but there was no conviction in it. It can't be. The odds? Take the test, Catherine said. Take the damn test, Richard. Because if that boy is David's, if he's your nephew, you need to know. And his mother. God? His mother has been lying this whole time? I don't know if she knows, Richard said weakly. Maybe she truly doesn't know who the father is. Or maybe she saw you in the papers and decided it was time for a con, Catherine shot back. Think about it, Richard. She shows up out of nowhere with a kid who looks exactly like yours, who just happens to be the right age to be David's. And suddenly you're paying her rent, paying for private school, footing the bill for everything. You don't see the pattern, Richard wanted to argue. He wanted to defend Lisa and Ethan, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, and the more he thought, the more questions surfaced. Lisa always got nervous when he asked about Ethan's father. She changed the subject quickly. Say it didn't matter that it was the past. And that first day when Ethan mentioned he'd never met his dad. I need to think, Richard said, his voice distant. You need to act, Catherine corrected. Do the DNA test, Richard. Find the truth. Because if you're being manipulated, if they're exploiting your grief, and if he really is my nephew? Richard asked. If he's David's son, does that change anything? It changes everything, Catherine said. Because it means his mother hid it from you on purpose. It means she knew and waited until you were vulnerable enough to be used. It means you have legal rights. Family rights. I'm not taking a child from his mother, Richard said firmly. No, Catherine challenged. Not even if she's a liar. Not even if she's using you. Think, Richard. That boy could be your nephew. Coleman blood. He deserves the name, the inheritance, everything that comes with it, and he deserves better than an opportunist raising him in Dorchester. Richard hung up with shaking hands. He looked around his luxurious office, the paneled wood, the original paintings, the view of the Charles River. It all felt false suddenly, shallow. He picked up the phone again and made a call. Dr. Morrison? Richard Coleman here. I need you to run a DNA test. Discreet, urgent. I'll send 2 samples tomorrow. When he ended the call, he looked at the framed photo of Benjamin on his desk. His son smiled at the camera, happy, innocent, alive. Forgive me, Richard whispered to the photo. Forgive me for doubting. Forgive me for needing to know. Across the city, in apartment 4C, Ethan jolted awake from a nightmare. He dreamed of fire, of screaming, of worlds collapsing. His heart hammered in his chest. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The storm was coming, and none of them were ready. Richard spent the next 4 days in a private hell of waiting. Dr. Morrison had said the DNA test results would take 5 to 7 business days. Every hour felt like an eternity. He had collected Ethan's sample discreetly, a glass the boy had used at dinner, carefully sealed in a plastic bag. Guilt gnawed at him. He was betraying the trust of an innocent child. But he had to know. During those days, Richard avoided Ethan and Lisa. He invented urgent business meetings, trips he never took. Lisa called twice, worried, but he sent short replies saying he was busy. He could feel the distance growing, and he hated every second of it. But on Thursday night, something happened that changed everything. Richard was alone in the mansion, a glass of whiskey in hand, something he rarely touched since Benjamin's death. He was staring out the window at the dark garden when the intercom buzzed. Mr. Coleman? The doorman's voice crackled. There's a boy here. Says his name is Ethan Brooks. Cersei, he's crying. Richard's heart stopped. Send him up, now. He ran to the door, opening it before Ethan even arrived. The boy was soaked, it had started raining, and his clothes were torn. He had a gash above his right eye, blood mixing with rainwater running down his face. "Ethan, my God, what happened?" Richard pulled him inside, grabbing a towel from the nearby bathroom. Ethan was trembling, not just from the cold, but from something deeper. Fear, trauma. I didn't know where else to go," he sobbed. Some guys from the neighborhood said my mom owed money to the landlord. Old debt from before you helped us. They broke into the apartment, wanted to take our stuff. I tried to stop them, and He touched the cut on his forehead, wincing in pain. Rage exploded inside Richard. "Where's your mother? Is she safe?" "She was at work when it happened," Ethan explained, still shaking. "I was home alone doing homework. They kicked the door in. There were 3 of them. I managed to run, but Richard, they destroyed everything. Smashed the TV, threw our clothes everywhere, said if we don't pay by tomorrow." "How much?" Richard demanded, his voice like steel. $3,000, Ethan whispered. "It's the back rent from before, but with their interest and fees, my mom could never catch up." "This ends now," Richard said firmly. He picked up the phone and called his personal lawyer, Marcus, Richard Coleman. "I need you to handle something tonight." "Yes, tonight? I have the names of the thugs and the building address. I want you to deal with the landlord and clear any debt. And I want restraining orders against those men. Immediately." As he spoke, Richard gently cleaned the gash on Ethan's forehead. It wasn't deep, but it would leave a small scar. Each touch reminded him of patching up Benjamin when he fell playing baseball, when scraped knees needed bandages. When he hung up, he looked into Ethan's green eyes, so much like Benjamin's, so much like his own, and something inside him broke. "Ethan," he said softly, "you and your mother aren't going back to that apartment." "It's over. You're staying here." "What?" Ethan blinked, unconfused. "Here, in your house?" "I have more than enough rooms," Richard said. "The house has 8 suites. You can pick whichever you want, or, if you'd rather have your own place, I can get you an apartment in Back Bay, Beacon Hill, wherever you want. Secure. With a doorman. No threats. No fear." "Richard, that's too much," Ethan started. "We can't accept—" "Yes, you can." Richard cut him off, gripping the boy's shoulders. "Ethan, you came to me when you were afraid. Not the police, not anyone else. You came to me. Do you know what that means?" Ethan shook his head, tears running again. "It means you trust me," Richard said, his own voice breaking. "And I will not betray that trust. No matter what happens, no matter what I find out, I will protect you. And your mother? That's a promise." The words slipped out before Richard could stop them, and the moment he said them, he knew they were true. The DNA test didn't matter. Whether there were secrets or manipulation didn't matter. This boy had come to him in his most vulnerable moment, and Richard would not abandon him. Every doubt Catherine had planted, every suspicion, every dark theory, vanished in that instant. Because here was a 12-year-old boy, terrified and hurt, who had run 4 miles in the rain to the one person he believed could keep him safe. "Thank you," Ethan whispered, collapsing into Richard's arms. And Richard held him, truly held him for the first time, feeling the boy tremble against his chest. He wasn't Benjamin. He never would be. But he was something just as precious. A new chance to be a father, to protect, to love. "Let's call your mom," Richard said gently, still holding him. "Let's tell her what happened and make sure she's safe. Then we'll get you dinner. You're freezing and probably starving. And after that, we'll figure out the rest." While Ethan dialed Lisa, Richard glanced out the window again. Outside, the storm raged, lightning slashing the night sky. But inside, for the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home. An hour later, Lisa arrived in a panic, still in her cleaning uniform, and found her son safe, clean, fed, asleep on Richard's library sofa wrapped in a soft blanket. "What happened?" she asked, and Richard told her everything. When he finished, Lisa was crying. "Those men, they could have. If he hadn't gotten away." "But he did," Richard said firmly. "And he's safe now. You both are. Lisa, I know you're afraid to accept help. I know you're afraid of relying on someone. But this isn't charity. This is family." "Family?" Lisa echoed, uncertain. "I have no one," Richard admitted. My parents died years ago. My brother's been gone more than a decade. My ex-wife hates me. Benjamin was everything I had, and when he died, I was alone. Completely alone. He looked at Ethan, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. And then I found you. I know it sounds insane. I know it's fast. I know it should be impossible. But when I look at that boy, I don't just see Benjamin. I see hope. I see purpose. I see a reason to keep living. Lisa followed his gaze, looking at her son in peace. Stay, Richard pleaded, his voice raw with sincerity. At least until we find you a safe place. At least until we know you're protected. And after that, we'll see. No pressure. No obligations. Lisa took a deep breath. Every instinct screamed for caution, to keep her distance, to protect her son. But looking at Richard, this powerful man asking, not demanding, offering protection without control, she made a choice. All right, she whispered. We'll stay. For now. Richard closed his eyes, relief flooding through him. Thank you, he said. None of them knew that in 2 days, the DNA results would arrive, and the truth they revealed would change everything in ways no one could imagine. But that night in the Beacon Hill mansion, 3 lost souls found shelter in the storm, and sometimes that's all that matters. The first days at the Beacon Hill mansion were surreal. Lisa and Ethan were given the suite on the 3rd floor, 2 connected bedrooms with a private bathroom and a view of the garden. It was bigger than their entire apartment in Dorchester. Lisa cried that first night not from sadness, but from the sheer shock of being in a place with no leaks, no street noise, no fear of break-ins. Ethan chose the smaller bedroom, leaving the larger one for his mother. When he walked in and saw the king-size bed, the solid wood desk, the empty shelves waiting for books, he just stood there in the middle of the room, unsure of what to do. You can decorate it however you like, Richard said from the doorway, watching him. We can go buy whatever you need. Posters, games, books, anything. I've never had a real room before, Ethan admitted quietly. I always slept on a mattress on the floor next to my mom's bed. The revelation shattered Richard's heart. 12 years old. The boy was 12 and had never known privacy, never had his own space, never had a place that was truly his. Well, Richard said, fighting to steady his voice, now you do, and no one's ever going to take it away from you. In the days that followed, a routine began to take shape. Richard hired a driver to take Ethan to school every morning. He helped Lisa land a far better job, as a facilities manager at a tech company in Cambridge, with a decent salary, benefits, and humane hours. For the first time in years, Lisa didn't have to juggle 3 jobs just to survive. But the most important part was the nights. Every evening after dinner, Richard and Ethan spent time together. Sometimes they watched movies in the private theater downstairs. Other times they played chess, Richard teaching him the moves, surprised at how quickly Ethan picked them up. And sometimes they just talked. It was during one of those conversations, a week after they moved in, that Richard finally showed Ethan Benjamin's room. I haven't brought anyone in here since he died, Richard admitted, standing in the doorway. The sign still read Ben's room in colorful letters Benjamin had painted when he was 7. Ethan stepped inside carefully, almost reverently. The room was perfectly preserved. Red Sox posters on the walls, baseball trophies on the shelf, books neatly arranged in alphabetical order. Benjamin had been meticulous. And the bed still made with a Patriot's comforter. He loved sports, Ethan observed, picking up a signed baseball. More than anything, Richard said, stepping inside for the first time in months. He played for the school team. He was the pitcher. Not the best, but the most determined. He never gave up, even when he was losing. Ethan looked at the photos scattered across the desk. Benjamin in his baseball uniform. Benjamin blowing out birthday candles. Benjamin hugging Richard at a Red Sox game. And then he saw it. The framed photo above the bed. Benjamin at 9 years old, smiling at the camera in a Celtics t-shirt. It was like looking in a mirror. Now I get it, Ethan whispered. Why you were so shocked when you saw me. It's scary how much we look alike. Richard moved closer, gazing at the photo beside him. It's not just the face, he said softly. It's the way you smile. The way you frown when you're concentrating. The way you bite your lip when you're nervous. They're mannerisms no one could fake. Do you think it's a God thing? Ethan asked. Like, do you think he made me look like Benjamin for a reason? Richard was silent for a long time. I didn't used to believe much in God. I thought everything was just chance, luck, coincidence. But when Benjamin died and then, 3 years later, I found you. On a street I never go to. On a day I almost stayed home. Ethan, I can't explain it any other way but divine. Ethan picked up the teddy bear lying on the bed, the same one Richard had clung to on his loneliest nights. What was he like? I mean, really like, not just the facts, but who he was. And for the first time in 3 years, Richard really talked about Benjamin. He told Ethan how Benjamin was afraid of thunder but pretended to be brave so his parents wouldn't worry. How his laugh was so loud it made everyone else laugh too. How he had a huge heart and always defended smaller kids who got bullied at school. How he loved blueberry pancakes but hated chocolate ones. How he dreamed of becoming a veterinarian because he loved animals more than people. He was special, Richard said, tears running freely now. Not because he was my son, but because he was genuinely good, pure, the kind of person the world needs more of. I wish I could have met him, Ethan said honestly. I wish you had too, Richard replied. I think you would have been great friends. They stood in silence, surrounded by the presence of someone who was gone, yet whose memory filled every corner of that room. Richard, Ethan finally spoke. Do you think I could stay here? In this room? Richard turned, surprised. You want to? I don't want to replace him, Ethan said quickly. Never, but I feel like there's something here. Something good. And maybe if I stay here, I can keep his memory alive. I can take care of his things. I can be, I don't know, a guardian. Richard's chest tightened with overwhelming emotion. This boy, who had so little, was offering to safeguard the memories of a boy who had had everything. Benjamin would love that, Richard said, his voice breaking. He'd love knowing someone was looking after his things. Someone who understood. Someone who was like him. That night, Ethan moved into Benjamin's room. But he didn't change anything. He kept the posters, the trophies, the books. He only added his own things, creating a strange but beautiful blend of two boys separated by time and death, yet connected by something unexplainable. Lisa watched it all with conflicted emotions. She saw her son blossoming in ways she had never imagined. She saw Richard becoming the father figure Ethan had never had. She saw a home being built out of ruins and loss, but she also saw danger. She saw how attached Ethan was becoming, how she herself was starting to trust, how they were all building something fragile that could shatter in an instant. It was the 10th day since the DNA test when the envelope arrived. Richard was in his office when his secretary called. Mr. Coleman, there's correspondence from Dr. Morrison, marked confidential and urgent. Richard's heart stopped. The results. They had arrived. Leave it on my desk, he said, his voice eerily calm, and cancel all my meetings today. When he was alone, Richard stared at the white envelope for a long time. Inside was the truth that could explain everything or destroy everything. He thought of Ethan, sleeping in Benjamin's room, caring for his memories as if they were sacred. He thought of Lisa, finally smiling again, finally resting. He thought of the makeshift family they were building. And then he thought of Catherine, her accusations, her suspicions of manipulation and deceit. With trembling hands, Richard opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, DNA test results, numbers, percentages, scientific jargon, and at the bottom, in bold print, the conclusion, probability of biological relationship. Uncle-nephew. 99.97%. The paper slipped from Richard's hand. Ethan was David's son. His nephew, Coleman blood, and Lisa had known all along. Richard sat in his office for 2 hours, just staring at the paper. The words seemed to pulse on the page. 99.97% probability. Ethan Brooks was his nephew. David's son. Anger came first. Hot, searing, consuming. Lisa had lied. She knew who Ethan's father was and hid it. She'd let Richard believe it was coincidence, divine destiny, when all along it was just genetics, cold as simple biology. She had taken advantage of him, seen a vulnerable man shattered by loss and exploited it, exactly as Catherine had warned. Richard crumpled the paper in fury and tossed it onto the desk. Then he picked up the phone. Lisa, come down to my office. Now. 5 minutes later, Lisa stepped in, feeling the tension instantly. Richard stood with his back to her, staring out the window, his posture rigid as stone. Richard? What happened? He turned slowly. His face was a mask of restrained rage. How long have you been planning this? From the start? Or did you decide on the spot when you saw the opportunity? Lisa blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Richard grabbed the crumpled sheet, smoothed it on the desk, and slid it toward her. Rid. With trembling hands, Lisa took the document. Her eyes ran over the words, the technical language, until they reached the fatal conclusion. She read it once, twice, 3 times, as if she couldn't believe it. DNA test, she whispered. You tested Ethan? Without telling me. Answer my question, Richard said, his voice ice cold. You knew Ethan was my brother's son. How long have you been running this con? Con? Lisa stared at him, horror dawning. You think Richard, I didn't know. Don't lie to me. Richard exploded, slamming his hand on the desk. You had an affair with my brother. How could you not know the connection? Because I never knew his full name, Lisa shouted back, tears spilling. I was 19, Richard. I met a guy named David in a bar in Cambridge. He never gave me his last name. Never said he had a rich family. Never said anything. So it was just a fling. Richard laughed bitterly. How convenient. It was, Lisa cried, tears running freely now. I was young and stupid, and he was handsome and charming. We met 3 times. 3, Richard. And then he disappeared. Stopped answering my messages. Stopped showing up. 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. And you never tried to find him. I did, Lisa screamed. I tried, but I only had a first name, the bar he liked, and that he drove a Porsche. Do you know how many Davids with Porsches there are in Boston? And I didn't have money for investigators. I barely had money for food. Richard was silent, jaw tight. Lisa went on, her voice fraying. 6 months after Ethan was born, I saw it in the paper. David Coleman, 29, dies in car crash. There was a photo. It was him. The man I'd met, my son's father, and he was dead. You saw the name Coleman and never connected it to me, Richard challenged. Why would I? Lisa shot back. Coleman isn't exactly rare, and you think I knew who Richard Coleman was when Ethan was a baby? I was trying to survive, Richard, working awful jobs, raising a baby alone. No money, no help, nothing. She looked down at the paper again. When I first saw you, when Ethan showed me your card, I didn't connect anything. Why would I? The David I knew never mentioned brothers. Never mentioned family. He was just a pretty guy at a bar who made me feel special for 3 nights and then vanished. Richard felt the anger begin to drain, replaced by something naughtier, confusion, sadness. Because what Lisa was saying fit. David had been like that. Irresponsible, selfish, living for the next moment. You really didn't know, Richard said at last. It wasn't a question. I swear on everything holy, Lisa said, voice breaking. I swear on my son's life. If I had known Ethan was your nephew, that he had family, God, Richard, do you think I would have let him grow up in poverty if I knew there was a wealthy family who could help? Richard sank into his chair, rubbing his face. Catherine said you were manipulating me. That you saw an opening and took it. Your ex-wife? Lisa asked, then understood. She sent those photos. She's the one who made you doubt us. Richard nodded miserably. So you did a secret DNA test because of what she said, Lisa concluded, more hurt than angry now. You doubted us. You doubted me. I needed the truth, Richard said weakly. You could have asked. Lisa cried. You could have talked to me, told me your suspicions. Instead, you collected my son's DNA in secret like we were criminals. Richard had no defense. She was right. He had betrayed their trust. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry. I was afraid. Afraid of being fooled again. Afraid of trusting and being destroyed. Lisa dropped into the chair opposite him, exhausted. I was afraid too, Richard. Afraid to get attached and lose everything. Afraid Ethan would get attached and you'd eventually discard us. But I chose to trust anyway. I chose to believe you were different. They sat in silence for a long moment. He's my nephew, Richard finally said. awe in his voice. Ethan is my nephew. Coleman blood. The only family I have left. And my son, Lisa reminded him firmly. First and above all, he's my son. I know, Richard said quickly. I don't want to take him from you, Lisa. I never did. Now that I know the truth, I want to do things right. Legally. Officially. What do you mean? Lisa asked cautiously. Richard took a breath. I want to add Coleman to his name. Ethan Coleman Brooks. I want him to have access to the family trust. I want him recognized as a Coleman heir. But, he met her eyes. Only if you agree. Only if Ethan wants it. You both have all the control. Lisa studied his face. The anger had passed, replaced by vulnerability. Richard Coleman, the ruthless magnate, was asking permission. Offering and not demanding. We have to tell him, Lisa said. He deserves the truth. I agree, Richard said. But how? Together, Lisa replied. We tell him together. As a family. The word hung between them. Family. No longer a stranger helping. No longer charity. But a real family with blood to prove it. That night they called Ethan into the library. He walked in smiling, still in his school uniform. With no idea the bomb about to go off in his life. Ethan, sit, Richard said gently. We need to talk about something important. Ethan's smile faded. Did I do something wrong? No, Lisa said quickly, sitting beside him. Nothing wrong, but there's something we found out. About you. About your family. And together, Richard and Lisa told him everything. About David. About the DNA test. About the impossible connection that explained why he looked so much like Benjamin. When they finished, Ethan was in shock, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. So Benjamin was my cousin. He was, Richard confirmed, his own voice thick. And I'm your uncle. Blood family. And my dad. Ethan looked at Lisa. My dad was his brother. Lisa nodded, squeezing her son's hand. Ethan sat quietly for a long moment, processing. Then he looked between Lisa and Richard. An understanding slowly dawned on his face. So it wasn't coincidence, he said. It wasn't God putting us in each other's path. It was just genetics. Or, Richard said softly, it was God using genetics as the tool. Who says the divine and the scientific can't coexist? Ethan thought about that. Then a small smile appeared. Benjamin was my cousin. I have family. And I still do. He looked at Richard. I still have you. Richard couldn't hold back anymore. He pulled Ethan into a tight hug, crying openly. You'll always have me, kid, always. You're a Coleman. You're my nephew, and nothing will change that. Lisa watched, her own tears falling, as her son finally belonged, finally had roots, finally had family. The storm had passed, and on the other side, they emerged not broken but stronger. A family born of pain, forged in loss, but real in the only way that matters. 3 weeks after the DNA revelation, just when it seemed everything was finally falling into place, Catherine struck. Richard was in the office of Marcus Holloway, his attorney of 20 years, discussing the paperwork to officially add the Coleman name to Ethan's. It was a simple process, just a formality now that Lisa had agreed wholeheartedly. Richard, Marcus said, his tone a little too cautious. There's something you need to know before we move forward. What is it? Richard asked, signing a document. Marcus slid a thick envelope across the table. Catherine filed a lawsuit yesterday. She's contesting custody of Ethan. The world stopped. She's what? Richard exploded, ripping open the envelope. Inside were page after page of legal jargon, but the core was clear. Catherine Coleman was petitioning for full custody of Ethan Brooks, claiming Lisa was an unfit mother and that, as an aunt by marriage, she had legal rights to her late husband's nephew. This is insanity, Richard said, his voice shaking with rage. She's never even met Ethan. And we're divorced. She's arguing, Marcus explained carefully, that Lisa raised Ethan in extreme poverty for 12 years, exposing him to dangerous environments. She has photos of the Dorchester apartment, police reports from the building, evidence that Ethan missed school regularly to work. And she's claiming that you, as the biological uncle and de facto father figure, deserve shared custody, something she, as your ex-wife and Benjamin's stepmother, can help provide. This is about money, Richard spat. In the divorce, she got a fortune. But this is about the Coleman Trust Fund. About inheritance. Most likely, Marcus agreed. But legally, she has some valid points. Lisa does have a history of financial instability. Multiple moves, lack of resources. A judge could question whether she can provide the environment Ethan deserves. She did the best she could, Richard shouted. She was alone, no support, no money. That doesn't make her a bad mother. I know, Marcus said calmly, and we'll fight this with everything we've got. But you need to be prepared. Catherine has expensive lawyers, and she knows how to play dirty. Richard left the office with his mind spinning. He needed to warn Lisa, prepare Ethan, protect his family. His family? When had he started thinking of them that way? When Richard got home, he found Lisa in the kitchen making dinner, something she insisted on doing, even though Richard offered to hire a chef. She said cooking for her family made her feel useful. One look at his face and Lisa knew something terrible had happened. What is it? She asked, dropping the knife. Richard told her everything. With every word, he watched the color drain from Lisa's face. By the time he finished, she was gripping the counter just to stay upright. She's going to take my son, Lisa whispered. She's going to take Ethan. No, she won't, Richard said firmly, gripping her shoulders. I won't let that happen. We'll fight this, Lisa, and we'll win. How? Lisa cried. She's right. I raised him in poverty. I could barely pay rent. He had to work at 12 years old. What judge is going to look at that and say I'm a good mother? Any judge who sees how much you love that boy, Richard said intensely. Any judge who sees you did it all alone with no help, no support. You're a hero, Lisa, not a villain. But what if it's not enough? Lisa sobbed. What if I lose him? What if, Mom? They both turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, pale-faced, clearly having heard everything. Ethan, honey, Lisa began, but he cut her off. She can't take me from you, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tears. I won't let her. I'll tell the judge. I'll tell them everything you've done for me. How you never gave up. How you always put me first. Ethan. Lisa pulled him into her arms, both of them crying. Richard watched, something breaking and reshaping inside him. This was his family. Not just by blood, though that was true now too, but by choice. By love. By everything that really mattered. And Catherine wanted to destroy it out of greed. Not while he was breathing. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Richard hired the best custody lawyers in Boston. They prepared Lisa, rehearsed testimony, gathered evidence proving she was a loving, dedicated mother. But Catherine was prepared too. The day of the hearing was cold and rainy. Richard and Lisa and Ethan sat on one side of the courtroom. On the other, Catherine, dressed in black Chanel, flanked by her expensive legal team. She didn't even look at them. As if they were nothing. The judge, Honorable Margaret Chen, was known for being fair but tough. She didn't tolerate nonsense, and she wasn't impressed by money. Catherine's lawyers went first. They showed grim photos of the Dorchester apartment, school records of Ethan's absences, evidence that he had worked illegally at 11. They painted Lisa as negligent, irresponsible, unfit. Lisa cried silently, each accusation like a knife. Then it was the defense's turn. Richard's attorney called witnesses. Teachers testified that Ethan, despite hardships, was bright and hardworking. Lisa's new boss explained she was an outstanding employee. Neighbors from Dorchester told stories of how Lisa always protected Ethan, always put him first. And then Richard was called to the stand. Mr. Coleman, the lawyer began. How long have you known Lisa and Ethan Brooks? A little over 2 months, Richard answered. And in that time, what have you observed about the relationship between mother and son? Richard looked straight at Judge Chen. I've seen the greatest display of unconditional love I've ever witnessed. Lisa Brooks may not have money. She may not have resources. But she has something money can't buy, absolute devotion to her child. He drew a shaky breath. I lost my son 3 years ago. Benjamin had everything, the best food, the best schools, the best doctors. And still, I couldn't save him. All my money, all my power meant nothing when it really mattered. Tears filled his eyes. But Lisa kept Ethan alive, safe and loved with almost nothing. She sacrificed everything, her health, her dreams, her youth, to make sure that boy had a chance. And you know what she raised? A kind, brave, compassionate kid. A kid who, when he was scared, trusted me. A kid who treats the memories of my late son as sacred. He turned to Catherine. My ex-wife wants Ethan for all the wrong reasons. She doesn't know him. She doesn't care about him. She wants the idea of him. A replacement for Benjamin. A way to keep her hands on the Coleman fortune. But Ethan is not a replacement. He's his own person. And he deserves to stay with the woman who loved him when he had nothing. Not with the woman who only wants him now that he's worth something. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Then Judge Chen spoke. Mr. Coleman, are you aware you could petition for custody yourself? As the biological uncle. I am, Richard said. And why haven't you? Because Ethan doesn't need me as his father. He has a mother. The best mother he could have. Richard looked at Lisa, who was openly crying now. All I can offer is support, resources, love. But her love came first, and it always will. Judge Chen took notes, then looked at Ethan. Young man, would you like to speak? Ethan stood, his legs trembling. Yes, Your Honor. He walked to the front, small and nervous but determined. My mom gave me everything, he said, his voice cracking. Maybe we didn't have money. Maybe our apartment was bad. But she gave me love. She gave me safety. She taught me to be good. And when things got too hard, when we were about to give up, God sent Richard to us. He looked at Richard. I love him. He's my family now. But my mom is my mom. And no one can change that. Not money. Not anyone. Judge Chen nodded slowly. I'll deliberate. You'll have my decision in 48 hours. As everyone left the courtroom, Catherine finally looked at Richard. Her eyes burned with hatred and fear. She knew she had lost. 48 hours felt like 48 years. Lisa barely slept, barely ate. She stayed up at night watching Ethan sleep, memorizing every detail of his face as if it were the last time. Richard tried to reassure her, but he was terrified himself. He'd seen the judicial system do inexplicable things before. On the morning of the third day, they all returned to court. The room was sparser this time. Only the parties involved, the attorneys, and a few reporters who had picked up the case. Judge Chen entered, her expression unreadable. All rise, she ordered, and everyone obeyed. I have carefully reviewed all evidence presented. I have heard testimony from both sides. And I have reached a decision. Lisa's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Ethan squeezed her hand hard enough to hurt. Across the way, Richard was taut as a violin string. First issue. Is Mrs. Catherine Coleman an appropriate party to petition for custody? Judge Chen looked directly at Catherine. The answer is no. Mr. and Mrs. Coleman's divorce was finalized over 2 years ago. Catherine Coleman has no biological relationship to Ethan Brooks, no established legal relationship, and most importantly, has shown no genuine interest in the child's well-being beyond financial motivations. Catherine went white. Her lead attorney whispered furiously in her ear. Second issue, is Lisa Brooks a fit mother? The judge continued. Lisa held her breath. Looking at the facts in isolation, some of her decisions could be questioned. Inadequate housing, irregular schooling, exposure to child labor. However, the judge removed her glasses, looking straight at Lisa with something like understanding. However, context matters. Lisa Brooks was a 19-year-old single mother with no family support, no resources, fighting to survive in a system that provides an inadequate safety net. Despite these impossible circumstances, she never abandoned her son. She never intentionally put him in harm's way. She consistently prioritized his well-being above her own. Tears streamed down Lisa's face. Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, the circumstances have changed dramatically. Ethan now lives in a safe environment, attends an excellent school, and has his needs met. This occurred not because someone took him from his mother, but because the mother accepted help when it was offered, demonstrating that she puts her child above her pride. The judge put her glasses back on. Therefore, my decision is, Catherine Coleman's petition is denied with prejudice. Full custody remains with Lisa Brooks. Case closed. The gavel struck like thunder through the courtroom. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lisa collapsed, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Ethan hugged her, crying as well. Richard wrapped them both in his arms, tears running down his own face. They had won. Across the courtroom, Catherine stood rigidly, her face a mask of contained fury. She looked at Richard one last time. Not with hatred now, but with something deeper. Perhaps regret. Perhaps the recognition that she had lost more than a court case. She had lost any chance at redemption. Without a word, Catherine left the courtroom, her heels echoing in the hush. Richard watched her go and felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, only relief that this chapter was finally closed. 6 months later, the garden at the Beacon Hill mansion was unrecognizable. Where there had once been only perfectly trimmed lawn and sepulchral silence, there was now life. A new jungle gym in the corner, a makeshift baseball net, toys scattered, laughter echoing through the old trees. It was Ethan's 13th birthday, and Richard had insisted on a big party. Not just family, though they were essentially just the three of them, but Ethan's school friends, neighbors, even a few of the old Dorchester buddies Lisa had managed to track down. "He's happy," Lisa said, standing beside Richard on the porch, watching Ethan play baseball with his friends. "Truly happy. I can't even remember the last time I saw him like this." "You did that," Richard said. "You raised an incredible kid." "We did," Lisa corrected gently. "You're part of this now, too." Richard smiled, a real one, the first in years. He looked at Lisa's face and saw no longer the exhausted, frightened woman he'd met months ago, but someone who had blossomed. She'd gone back to night school to finish the high school diploma she'd abandoned when she got pregnant. She talked about maybe going to college. "Can I ask you something?" Richard said, hesitant. "Of course. Have you ever thought about starting over? Not necessarily romantically, but socially? You're young, Lisa. You have a whole life ahead of you." Lisa gave a half smile. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. For the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving. I'm living. That's enough for now." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Ethan connect with a pitch and sprint around the improvised bases, his friends shouting him on. "He looks like Benjamin when he runs," Richard observed softly. "The way he leans forward, arms pumping." "Coleman DNA," Lisa teased. "Coleman DNA," Richard agreed, and for the first time he could say it without pain, only gratitude. Later, when they cut the cake and everyone sang happy birthday, Richard made an announcement. "Ethan, come here a second." Ethan walked over, chocolate on his face, eyes bright with happiness. Richard pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Your birthday present," he said, handing it over. Ethan opened it, confused. Inside were legal documents. He read slowly, brow furrowing as he tried to parse the formal language. Then his eyes widened. You're adopting me officially." "With your mother's permission," Richard said quickly, glancing at Lisa, who was smiling through tears. "Not to replace her, never, but to make official what's already true. You're my nephew. You're a Coleman, and I want the whole world to know it." Ethan looked to his mother, who nodded encouragingly. Then he threw his arms around Richard, hugging him hard. "Thank you," Ethan whispered. "For everything. For finding us. For saving us. For being family." "You saved me," Richard corrected, his voice thick. "When I saw you on that sidewalk, I was dead inside. You brought me back to life." 2 years later, Ethan Coleman Brooks, now 15, stood at Fenway Park in his school baseball uniform. It was the championship game, and the stands were packed. In the front row, Lisa screamed herself hoarse, embarrassed, and not caring. Beside her, Richard filmed every second on his phone, smiling so wide his face hurt. It was the bottom of the 9th. Ethan was at bat, 2 runners on the score tied. The pressure was immense. The pitcher threw. Ethan swung, crack. The ball soared high, higher over the outfield, over the wall. Home run. The stands erupted. Lisa screamed so loudly she went raspy. Richard was jumping, hugging strangers, tears streaming without shame. As Ethan rounded the bases, he glanced up at the stands. He saw his mom, saw his uncle, saw his family, and for a brief second he swore he saw another figure. A 9-year-old boy with green eyes, smiling proudly. Benjamin. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was the sun in his eyes. Or maybe, just maybe, some angels get box seats. When Ethan crossed the plate, his team swallowed him in a pile of hugs and celebration. Even in the chaos, he glanced back at the stands one last time. His mother was crying. Richard was applauding. And Ethan Coleman Brooks, the boy who once had nothing and now had everything, knew a simple truth. Family isn't about DNA. It isn't about money. It isn't about perfection. It's about people who choose to stay even when it's hard. It's about love that heals impossible wounds. It's about second chances God gives when we least expect them. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about coincidences so perfect the only explanation is a miracle. So did this move you too? Richard, Elisa, and Ethan's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as tragedies, that God never abandons the brokenhearted, and that family is built with love, not just blood. If this story touched your heart, drop a like so I know. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Tell me in the comments, which part hit you hardest? When Richard first saw Ethan? When he hugged the boy in court? Or that final moment at the ball game? And if you're still thirsty for emotion, binge the other stories on the channel. Each one is unique, each one will make you feel. Thank you, from the heart, for staying till the end of this journey. You're amazing. See you in the next story. And remember, it's never coincidence. It's always providence. A big hug and see you soon.